Good evening, good afternoon. It's actually late afternoon, I guess, for you guys in California. It's evening for me here. I'm in Connecticut. My name is Christopher Bishop. I'm delighted to be speaking with you. Thank you, Kevin, for the invitation to
You're
share
welcome.
with the Southern California Quantum Computing Discussion Group. I'm the Master of Ceremonies at Insight Quantum Technology, which is a series of events. We just did one in early November. We've been doing them virtually, needless to say, but it's focused on quantum and business. I'm also a member of the QED-C, which is an acronym, stands for the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, and I'm a member of the Workforce Technology Advisory Committee. And as per Kevin's request, maybe we'll get more into that after my talk, share some insight for you into what QED-C is and what they do, who the members are, what the objectives are. Right, so I want to give you a sense of, I'm calling this the secrets to working in quantum. One of my passions is trying to enable people interested in working in quantum information science to understand, what it is and what the opportunities are, because there are many. It's a burgeoning space, as I'm sure you all know. So let me move on and share a little bit of my background, just how I ended up in quantum, give you some social historical perspective. I think when talking about the future, which we certainly are with quantum, it's good to have a sense of the past, how we got to now, right? Going to talk a little bit about what I think is the amazing potential impact of quantum information science, and then share with you some perspective on the quantum workforce ecosystem and real world opportunities, right? Who's looking for people to help? So a little bit of background on me. This is me in 1973 in a dressing room, tuning up with a band called McKendree Spring, about to open for the Eagles. I was on the road for 3 years, did 3 albums with this band, moved to New York. This is me at CBGB's playing my Steinberger bass, fronting my trio. Did a lot of gigs. I ended up in the jingle business in New York to get off the road. I played bass and sang on the first Kit Kat jingle. Give me a break. Oh, give me a break. Yeah, break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. And then got tired of the jingle business and taught myself to be a web producer. And much to my surprise, was hired by IBM. And I worked there for 15 years. First in corporate internet programs, but then in a bunch of different roles, including a couple of stints at corporate headquarters. This is me when Watson crushed the reigning grand champions. I was in corporate citizenship. We ran a day-long seminar on how Watson, this kind of AI instantiation, might drive the civic and social agenda, right? During that, my tenure at IBM, I did a TEDx talk. It's online if you want to look at it, talking about my multiple careers and working at IBM using social media. Did it at the Times Center in New York. I've been doing freelance consulting and writing and speaking. I left IBM about 8 years ago, each hired, as they say in big blue parlance. This is me at Caltech in their robotics lab. I gave a series of workshops on the future of fintech for their executive ed program. And, one of the processes was talking about where fintech is going. The client was State Street Global Advisors. And then germane to this conversation, why I'm here is I'm, again, the Master of Ceremonies for Insight Quantum Technology. This is a screen grab of me at the event in New York in early November. I also host a podcast called Quantum Tech Pod, where I interview C-suite execs at major quantum computing companies. Just spoke to Michael Bierkuck a couple of weeks ago. Really interesting conversation. Among other things, he described an initiative that he's involved in. He just won a project from the Australian government called the Moon to Mars Supply Chain Initiative. So we could talk more about that, but that's a pretty exciting, futuristic endeavor that they're about to undertake. So that's me. I want to talk broadly about the concept of work, right? It's been constantly reinvented, and work in the context of working in quantum, right, is no different. Since we were hunters and gatherers, wandering around in the Pleistocene wilderness 100,000 years ago. It's always driven by technology, whether it's spears or horseshoes or fire or, whatever the current technology might be, as part of a process, again, keep in mind, that's been going on literally for thousands of years. So here's a cobot and a human working together on some project in a manufacturing setting, it looks like. To the idea of understanding how we got to now, I usually like to pull this out as a pop quiz. And I don't know if there are many people in the chat who want to answer, but I pose this as a question, like, who said this and what did they say it about and when did they say it? So any history buffs in the call? Let me just read it to you. I refuse to issue a patent for fear it will put my poor subjects out of work.
Anybody?
Right, so, bum, 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 bum. I'm singing the Jeopardy theme. Bum,
The
bum, bum.
way you said it, Shakespeare.
Well, you're that's the right direction. So for the tip, one of the tips is subjects, right? So it's a monarch of some kind. And I did sort of say it with a fake British accent to some degree. So it's some, it's a ruler of some kind, right? So any other guesses? I see Brian's got question marks in the chat. So here's the deal. It was, go over here. It was Queen Elizabeth the First,
Wow.
right? And she said it about mechanized knitting machines, right?
Huh.
They were going to take away the jobs of people who'd been spinning wool in their living rooms and move it to a factory kind of setting. And she said it in 1589.
Wow.
So 430 years ago, they were having conversations about technology disrupting existing business models, right? That's the point I want to make with that slide. Historical context. This is from a book by a woman named Carlota Perez. She's a Venezuelan economist. She teaches at Cambridge. She has some cool videos on YouTube. She has a book called Technological Revolutions in Financial Capital. That's where I pulled this from. But she contends that there have been so far, the past, say, 350 years, 5 cycles driven by an innovation, some kind of crash or rationalization, standardization, and then a deployment phase, right? Where the innovation is standardized and adopted into current, say, business and societal models. So I'm not going to belabor this, but if you're interested in this kind of thing, the history of economics, right, driven by technology, I encourage you to check out this book. Worth noting that I always say in the age of oil, automobiles, and mass production, in 1908, just as a real world example, when Henry Ford started rolling Model Ts out of his assembly line in Detroit, farriers and blacksmiths got really nervous. Like, what the heck are we going to do now? So the smart ones figured out how to combine skills, take existing skills and transfer them, right? Learning what the delta was. So a carriage maker who'd been making carriages for horse-drawn vehicles figured out he had skills to make carriages, but had to figure out how to adapt that kind of skill set to incorporate an internal combustion engine. There's a great video, again, it's a bit of a sidebar, the great video that Brad Smith, president at Microsoft, put on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and it's titled "The Day the Horses Lost Their Jobs." And it's a 2.5-minute video about the last day that horses were used in New York to pull fire engines. And they harnessed them up and drove them from, engine house number 5 to Borough Hall in Brooklyn. And the streets were lined with people cheering. And then they took off the horses and, that was it. It was, engines driving fire engines from then on. So anyway, it's a fun book if you're into this kind of thing. And again, her videos, she has videos that talk about this context. So let's move into computers, right? More specifically, germane to this conversation about quantum. So mechanical devices is, humans have been developing technologies to help them solve problems and manipulate numbers, for a very long time. So the difference engine, Charles Babbage's, giant brass device that could add and subtract and multiply and divide. His concept was developed kind of in the early 19th century, 1830s, and, evolved into more complex devices that were mechanical, but that could do computations. Then the breakthrough was vacuum tubes in 1940, right? ENIAC, the computer that took up a room at the University of Pennsylvania, that again could compute in the time that it took, say, a person to calculate ballistic trajectories, typically took maybe 20 hours or something. ENIAC could do it in like 20 minutes. So keep that in mind as we talk about quantum later on in this talk. Then transistors and eventually integrated circuits transformed how you could use computers writ large to solve problems, right? And here we are in the 2010s and beyond. We're in the quantum state, right? It's evolving for sure, but it's going to be transformative, needless to say. And by the way, feel free to interrupt me if any of this doesn't make sense, or if you have questions or want to comment. I have the chat window open so I can see if you have something you want to add, please feel free, right? Let's make this interactive. Says, who can see your messages? Recording on. Okay. So a quote from Bob Souter, who I assume all of you know. If you don't know, I encourage you to at least follow him on LinkedIn. You could reach for him to see if he'll connect. He's a pretty open-minded guy. He accepts connection requests typically, but he says about quantum, many industries are currently working with quantum computers, including banking, capital markets, insurance, automotive, aerospace, and energy. That's really just, the main verticals, right, that are focused on this. In years to come, the breadth and depth of the industries leveraging quantum will continue to grow. This is kind of table stakes about where quantum is and where it's going. Bob Souter, brilliant guy. He wrote a very cool book called Dancing with Qubits that you might want to investigate if you're into learning more about his perspective on coding around the IBM perspective using superconducting qubits and Python. Let's talk about measuring quantum performance. I think it's an interesting, topic that we need to address. Again, back to the idea of mechanical devices to quantum, right, to integrated circuits and transistors. It's worth noting, for those of you who may or may not know, that Google's Sycamore computer performed a calculation in September 2019 in 200 seconds that a classical computer would need 10,000 years to complete. So they achieved what they're calling quantum supremacy. Now, a Chinese organization has ostensibly superseded that. IBM contended that their Summit supercomputer could have done it in 2.5 days, but still, the point I'm trying to make is, we're heading toward a new generation of computing power. Other ways to measure it: quantum volume, another IBM protocol, which combines the number of qubits and error rates and connectivity to come up with a number to measure performance. They recently announced a new protocol called Circuit Layer Operations Per Second, CLOPS, which captures how fast a quantum processor can execute circuits. So this is all important metrology, right? Measurement of performance is key. But I think, again, the quantum supremacy idea is something we need to all keep in mind. Pretty exciting. Right. Thank you, Brian. Yeah. He has 2 books. Bob Souter has a new one called, I think, Dancing with Python, actually. But so let's talk about problems. Given the fact that quantum supremacy could solve a problem in 200 seconds that a classical computer would take 10,000 years, we have problems we solve every day. Sometimes the calculations are challenging, but we can solve them in, a reasonable amount of time. But then there are problems that are so hard, we don't really even bother talking about them or solving them, right? They're just beyond what we could deal with. But imagine with quantum, we could maybe address them. So optimization, certainly. The traveling salesman problem, many of you are familiar with this, first formulated in 1930, describing exponentially more complex routing that it would be required to get someone efficiently between a group of destinations, right? So 15 cities is, 43 billion possible routes. As you add 5 more cities, the number goes up to a ridiculous, amount. 121 is a quadrillion possible routes. So imagine optimization. They're already using it in situations like BMW is using it to facilitate painting automobiles, right, in their assembly line. But logistics, certainly, manufacturing, transportation, lots of applications. How about drug discovery? Here we are coming, hopefully, out of the end of a pandemic, but quantum computing power could get us to drug discovery and drug development, exponentially faster. So they're talking about using our mRNA, for example, as cures for cancer, possibly, or genetic diseases, or Alzheimer's, or certainly the next pandemic, and given the power of quantum, to model complex molecules that classical computers choke on, that they can't deal with, right? Finance, certainly. If you're not familiar with Will Zhang, write down his name. He's sort of the Elvis Presley of quantum and finance. He's the head of quantum research at Goldman Sachs, and they're looking at ways to use quantum for portfolio optimization, to develop smart investment strategies, to be able to run much more complex Monte Carlo simulations than they can do now. So potential impact, in the financial services business is huge. Communication. Actually, we're going to do a little sidebar plug. We're going to do an Insight Quantum Technology event in The Hague at the end of February focused on the quantum internet. So imagine using, quantum to develop an immutable, fast, secure network, and applications might be certainly in finance, but in healthcare, legal, definitely military and defense. And there are a lot of projects going on around the world. There's a network in the Netherlands. This is a animated GIF of the one that the Chicago Quantum Exchange is developing, connecting Argonne and eventually Fermi and University of Chicago. Predicting the weather. Imagine if you could predict the weather more accurately. So today, the viability is maybe 3 days out, 80%, 95% maybe. We're supposed to get snow here in Connecticut, by the way, tonight. 10 days out, probably percentage of accuracy falls to closer to 60% maybe. But so imagine if you could predict the weather for 100 years. Imagine implications on certainly agriculture, but transportation, education, environment, what to manufacture. Well, we're going to have a snowstorm in the winter of 2072. So let's design logistics and supply chain and manufacturing to accommodate. Just saying. So that's potential, value prop and implications. Let's shift gears and talk about how you, listeners, can contribute, right? How you might participate. So I put this slide together to show how technology moves from the lab to the mainstream, right, to the consumer market. And I kind of had fun with it, right, pulling out these ads for computers from the 50s and 60s, right, some even from the 70s. But the idea is to get you thinking about the broader workforce ecosystem in quantum. I want you to keep in mind that technology always evolves and is iterative and has various value propositions that get transformed, transmuted, adopted, adjusted. For example, this ad in the middle of the page, right? Royal McBee Corporation. Anybody ever hear of that? So raise your hand if you ever heard of that. No, that brand is gone. What? And look at the gear this guy's sitting in. And the descriptor is compact, mobile, low in cost. So, and I have no idea. Maybe Royal McBee got bought or they went out of business. Who knows? A key screen grab here is the one on the upper left. So Microsoft MultiPlan is an exec, right? Hopefully with a P&L. Allows me to explore more alternatives in less time. I think it leads to better management decisions. So finding ways to market the value of innovative technology is the message from this page, right? So it takes a team, certainly scientists and researchers have to develop it, but then it has to be exploited and explained and interpreted for masses and for companies and for, again, execs with a P&L. So my other favorite I just want to call out is the Isaac Asimov one, right? So hyping Radio Shack. Yikes. I mean, maybe he had a lean year that year or something, but he signed him up to do some print ads for Radio Shack. But again, so these are kind of fun, right? Trust me, we're going to see these kind of ads for quantum. Definitely. So that takes me to what I think is the core of this presentation, right? The evolving quantum workforce ecosystem. And I want to spend a moment on this, and please, react or comment, but I want to take you through this because I think it's important, especially to people who are excited about quantum, but may not be particle physicists, right? So certainly at the center of the ecosystem, this is my take, right? Having had 8 careers so far in many of these areas, actually, in some of these areas. Quantum information science is certainly driven by scientists and researchers, right? And I'll show you some job recs later that certainly point this out and reinforce it. But that said, there's a whole range of ancillary and adjacent skill sets that are needed to drive understanding, ultimately adoption of this new technology. So let's begin in the upright: sales, biz dev, right? Somebody's got to convince somebody with a paycheck or with a checkbook, sorry, to sign up based on what the sensible business value is of this new technology. So, obviously IBM, Rigetti, IonQ, they all have teams, and you may know some of these people. I mean, Denise Ruffner is sort of the quintessential biz dev person. She's now had that role at 3 seminal companies, Cambridge Quantum, IonQ, she's now at Atom Computing, and she's an ex-IBMer like me. But somebody's got to translate this into what the potential business value is for customers. UX design, these all have physical manifestations. So somebody's got to design what this stuff looks like, what the human computer interface is like. UCD, it's like, PhDs in cognitive psychology are involved in these kinds of roles. Education, absolutely. The one discipline that enables all other disciplines, right? You've got to teach people what it is and how to do it. So obviously, I've just called out three universities, MIT, Caltech, University of Chicago, but these programs are going on all over the world, actually. There's a program at the University of Harrisburg that a gentleman named Terrell France runs. He's a colleague of mine in the QED-C workforce TAC. They're doing really interesting work there as well. Regulatory and policy, and that ties to the QED-C, which is funded by the Department of Energy and Department of Commerce. But somebody's got to be thinking about, regulatory and policy issues, like how do we control this stuff? I mean, you got to put on a seatbelt. So are there rules like that need to apply to how quantum gets manifest and deployed? Optics and photonics. I've had great conversations with people at companies that develop metrology gear and lasers and test equipment, and they describe themselves as being the Levi Strauss of quantum information science, right? So Levi Strauss provided supplies to miners during the gold rush in California. So not all the gold miners struck gold and made a lot of money, but Levi Strauss sold a lot of jeans and tents and pickaxes and panning devices and whatever. So comms and PR, this is critical, right? As well as marketing and branding. Somebody's got to translate this stuff into, from a comms perspective, marketing, so people can understand what it is, why it's important, what's the value of it, in language that people who aren't particle physicists can understand. And investing, as I mentioned, Will Zhang, there are research organizations at big banks exploring what the value of this is, how it's going to drive value for their customers and clients. And then strategy, McKinsey and Accenture, Ernst & Young, BCG, Deloitte, they all have practice areas focused on providing strategic guidance from a management consultant role around what quantum might do for their business, right? So I just want to pause there. Any questions, comments, reactions to that?
Yeah, this is Umesh.
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, Chris, great presentation. The slides are really, really awesome and very informative. Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing the wealth of information.
Thank you.
I have been following this for past 3-4 years when I worked in Honda and now at Sempra. And it's been a slow progress, right? And the Gartner hype cycle.
The hype cycle, yeah, the valley of despair, whatever.
Yeah,
and
this is right. So this is like it is starting to climb that curve right to the top. Is there any resources where I can track the progress, right? Kind of like a speedometer that, hey, progress, these are the milestones that needs to happen for quantum computing to be really, really effective, right? And go mainstream.
Yeah, that's an important question for sure, Umesh. Thank you. And thank you for your kind words about the charts. There are lots of newsletters and reports that are out there. Much of it is free and easily accessible. Inside Quantum Technology, the organization that I work for, publishes a daily newsletter. There's a Quantum Daily, which is a competitor, if you will, but again, another great source of information. Doug Fink has something called the Quantum Computing Report that you can subscribe to, really fantastic information. And I would encourage you to track down thought leaders on LinkedIn and follow them and their companies, and they often publish innovative, articles or posts or whatever about what their company's doing or what's going on in the field writ large. So that's, those are ways to do it. Also, you could set up Google Alerts. I have Google Alerts for quantum and future tech and, Bitcoin and other topics I'm interested in. But you could easily do that in Google, right? Set up an alert
Right.
and it'll feed you. You can set it up daily or a weekly summary or whatever. And then it, will send its spiders out across the web and pull up content, and you'll get more than you can handle. I'm sure.
That's the thing, right? It's an information overload, deciphering all that. It's kind of, oh my God,
Yeah.
a lot of. Mhm.
Well, it's, you have to learn to kind of parse it and rationalize it. And I always say, the good news is there are lots of great sources of information. The bad news is there are lots of great sources of information. So it takes, ongoing monitoring and managing. My general guidance is to try to follow and focus on advances in quantum that are driving business models, put simply, right? And unless you're deep into the research and the technology, which is not a bad thing, but I'm saying, viable use cases, and Bob Suter has said this at events where I've heard him speak. It's like, what are the use cases that are delivering value? What's gonna generate transformative processes in business models, and around those sort of categories, some of that I just shared with you, and others as well. But that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to drive adoption and understanding and value. So we can take advantage of this amazing technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be a game changer. I'm trying to find out opportunities, to kind of and contribute and provide services off of this. So starting to get into the learning mode first, and then do something with it.
Yeah. Well, here, let me go on and I'll show you.
Sure.
This is just, these are some organizations that need your talent. I'm wagging my finger at everyone watching this or watching the recording, and certainly to you, Umesh. I mean, this is just this is by no means comprehensive, but it's just a snapshot of some of the companies that need talent to drive their quantum-based business models, right? So big players, I mean, there's enabling technologies, QCware, Q Control, as I mentioned before, the company in Australia that's doing the moon to Mars supply chain. Strangeworks, Worley is someone you should all know about and follow his company, Strangeworks, right? Companies like Zapata, Cambridge Quantum Computing, which is now part of Continuum. I'll talk about that in a moment. ID Quantique. They're companies that are focused on specific sort of verticals or disciplines, chemicals, materials, biotech. One of my favorites is Polaris, which is not on here, but that's another company focused on chemical and pharma use of quantum. The big players in the lower left, of course, IBM, Google, right? Alibaba, Microsoft. They're all growing their businesses. I mean, Amazon now with their, bracket instantiation. I think they just added a fourth quantum computer that you can access through the cloud, and run experiments or put algorithms up there. A friend of mine says he thinks it's more of a market research project. Certainly they don't need to drive attributable revenue, but they're testing the market. They're testing to see who might use it. They're going to get data they can then parse to drive their involvement in quantum, right? So this is just sort of a sampling, right? Hardware and software. I want to share with you, I went on the web today because there was a post earlier this morning, actually two posts, one from Zapata and one from Rigetti, I think, about job opportunities. So I said, well, let me go grab some current information to share with this group this evening. So here's Continuum. If you don't know, this is a recently announced merger between Honeywell Quantum Solutions and Cambridge Quantum Computing. So they are now sort of, for all intents and purposes, they're the Apple of quantum, hardware, software, services, right? And deep client relationships. I mean, Honeywell has been providing guidance, everything from aerospace to manufacturing to, fire alarms and HVAC for major companies for over 100 years. So they have relationships, right? And Cambridge Quantum has the brain power and the connection to Cambridge University in England to develop quite a compelling portfolio, right? So this is just a screen grab from basically an hour ago. Obviously, they're looking for a lead physicist, a senior business support specialist, an advanced optical physicist. But I want to point out, they're also looking for a senior accounting specialist, right? They want someone to help them manage the books. So it's not just spintronics. It's not advanced atomic physicists for sure at the top of this list. But all the way of saying, if you're interested in getting involved in quantum, here's an example of a burgeoning company. This is, recently announced merger, and they're uniquely positioned to grow, again, based on relationships and their capability. It's going to be pretty exciting. Here's another one I want to share with you. Screen grab, again, from an hour ago, from Rigetti. Right, so this is just, again, a partial list of open positions. So they needed a manager for stock administration and payroll, as well as, a senior director for key account partnerships, right, in the sort of biz dev client relationship, customer success manager kind of role, right? Electrical engineer for sure, cryo background. But again, this is something I've never seen before, I have to confess. It's called Future Open Position. And I clicked on it to look at it. And what it is they want you to submit your resume. So if and when a job comes up that you might be a fit for, they can reach you. So that is how fast this is moving, man. I mean, that's unbelievable. Future Open Position. The what? Well, I have a degree in future open. I took an AP Future Open Position in high school. Like, the what? So, I mean, again, right, the implication is this is moving fast, and they want to get smart people in their database ready to bring on board. One more, again, from today. So this is Zapata, Christopher Savoy's company. Again, a name I'm dropping, but you should all either connect with him and or follow him and follow his company, right? Looking for a biz dev intern. So if you're interested in learning how to sell quantum to clients, here's a role you might take on. A technical recruiter, and even down to, check this out, a part-time office manager, right? Somebody to, I don't know, get coffee for Christopher and Catherine Lonigan, their CMO. So again, I'm beating a proverbial dead horse, but I want to give you a sense of the range of opportunities in quantum information science, right? I got a couple more. I'm going to blast through these. Quantum AI at Google, lots of careers, certainly electrical engineering, but again, the third bullet is senior product manager, right? Amazon with Bracket, they have lots of openings. This is actually an older screen grab, but certainly pointing out they're looking for applied scientists, but product managers, program managers. They need people to run projects, people who understand the technology enough, but know how to deal with a client and a budget and deliverable, right? And knowing enough about quantum and what the output is and what the client need is that they can do that. Here's QC-ware. So certainly quantum chemist, software engineer, but also a director of product management and a director of marketing. These are open positions, right, at QC-ware. Another one, so Zurich Instruments. They're based all over the world. They're looking for a senior marketing specialist to work in Boston, right? As well as certainly application engineers, application scientists, DevOps engineer, technical sales, right, in Shanghai.
Could you talk a little bit about it says women in quantum?
Yeah, so these are screen grabs from an event, it's called the Women in Quantum Summit. And they're run by the woman I mentioned before, Denise Ruffner. And I think they've done 5 so far. They tend to do kind of 1 a quarter. But what they do is this woman, Denise, who's now the VP Business Development at Atom Computing, pulls together, it's usually like a 2.5-day event, but she finds these incredibly brilliant women working in quantum. And if you want to have your mind blown, I don't know where she finds these people, but they're just fantastic. I mean, I'm a fan. I've been to all 5 of them. And they talk about the work they're doing. There's a woman in Russia who's talking about a lab she works in there. A lot of Asian, needless to say, a lot going on in China and Japan, people all over the world. So yeah, if you're interested in that, And I'm a big fan of trying to drive gender parity in technology writ large and quantum specifically. So I would encourage you to check it out, right? So again, these are some of the opportunities. So I'm going to say I'll see you in the quantum enabled future. Please connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not already connected. I accept pretty much all LinkedIn requests. Listen to my podcast. I think you find some of them interesting. I've spoken to a bunch of interesting people, and to be continued.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. That was awesome.